Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Sunday podcast here with the Reverend David William Parry in London and myself, John Barnwell, here in Detroit on what is our first podcast of 2021 on January 3rd, Jack of Spades. And so, in light of this time, and we're still within the 12 Holy Nights, which is a wonderful sacred time of year for contemplation. And I think a lot of people have been doing a lot of that. And I'm putting the word out just very circumspectly, shall we say. People that are planning on traveling to big events, make sure you bring food and water and things to shelter yourself because of all the closures that are going on with hotels, motels, and food service, and so on and so forth. So that being said, now let's move on. Well, this week actually I've been spending a lot of time wrestling with the world of ideas and the attribute of will. The two leading exponents of that, the German philosophers for the thinking realm would be Hegel, and for the world as will, would be Arthur Schopenhauer. And both of them in Berlin, uh, Hegel being very, very celebrated during his tenure in Berlin at the university. Arthur Schopenhauer, on the other hand, was pretty much passing unnoticed. And yet he was very significant, and Rudolf Steiner addresses these two as in a most interesting way that can be useful for the contemplation of any individual, even if they're not that versed in spiritual science. Because if you try to get an understanding of these two viewpoints, uh, it's important to note that Rudolf Steiner does make the point that the basic philosophical view of the Western lodges that he referred to, specifically in the city of London, was Hegelian. And that's that whole idea of thinking as being the primary attribute of reality. And if you look at that more closely, you see that the way in which they work with it, though, is that they want to work with it in secret. That they're not really that interested in bringing us up to steam as to what they might be working with. And it ends up getting projected into its shadow image as it goes farther west into America and is taking up in the realm of the electromagnetics. And so it ends up being the World Wide Web, which is like this web of cosmic ideation as a counter image. And so that's what we're looking at to a large extent, is this shadow image of cosmic thought. And on the other hand, with Arthur Schopenhauer, he really idealized the philosophies of the East and found a great affinity with the scriptures of the Orient. And their tendency to, especially in my studies, I perceive it as being largely an emphasis on the Shivite principle, the Shiva being that potency of will in the world, so to speak. And so when you look at the threefold principle in the East, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, you could think of it as thinking, feeling, and will. And Rudolf Steiner's very thorough in his articulation of that an individual is a being of thinking, feeling, and will. But one of the most interesting aspects of that is when he gets into explaining its relationship to human physiology, because he says that the, the skull, the head itself, essentially is retrograde, that it's held back, that it's kind of like this remnant of the past wisdom, and that you have this condensation of the individual's karmic past in the head, and that the will, which is your limbs, your to a large extent with your legs and your arms, that represents the will, and that pertains more to the future. And so you have the past and the tendency to be a retarded movement, and then you have this future element, which it's shall we say, it could be brought into darkness by things coming too soon. And so you have that tendency towards will condenses into matter, see? And thinking, actually, he said, if were you to view thinking from the outside, you'd see that thinking is light, right? And so, which is an interesting concept, thinking about thinking from the outside, which is not something most people do every day. But in looking at, and you see our Lord Jesus Christ saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. And so you see that there's this threefolding process that's at the core of human destiny. And so what is that third element? If you got your cosmic thought and cosmic will, in between there is the cosmic feeling. And that's the reverence. That's the thing that's missing in so many people's lives, that they don't have that mood of soul of reverence. They do not stand in awe before God's creation. And so when you get people that don't have that, then they can tend to pervert their activities into destructive realms of being and destructive moods of soul, right? But he makes the point that the head represents the cosmic past, the will represents the cosmic future, and that the only part of you that truly lives in the moment, in the presence, is that rhythmic center of heart and lungs. And so we have an interesting relationship, especially I'd like you if you find the spare time to go check out the work that Douglas Gabriel has been doing, furthering the research on the human heart, and he's done really an admirable job of developing the physiology of the cognitive functions of the heart that have come to light in recent years. That extends beyond the work that I did with Ralph Marinelli, where we were able to prove scientifically that the heart is not a pump. Exactly what it is, it's, well, that's multidimensional, and perhaps sometimes we can get into that. But at this point, I don't want to overburden you with too many riddles. That's all we do here is come up with these riddles in our struggle towards truth. And so we're happy to have here as my co-host the Right Reverend David William Parry, and his principal book is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by Daniela Irendust, and that's a remarkable book of essays. And we have his inspired poetry, Caliban's Redemption, and we have his Shakespearean study, The Grammar of Witchcraft, which, like I always say, or almost always, it's not a book on witchcraft, it's a Shakespearean study. And so those books can be found on Amazon. And as far as myself, my books are only available from me on eBay. And my first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail, the Order of the Knights Templar, and the True Rosicrucian Order. It's some 640 pages. And then the sequel to that is The Arcana of Light on the Path, which is more of a meditative tool based on Mabel Collins' Light on the Path. In both books are included a series of a great many cosmological diagrams that help one to decipher some of the riddles that we ponder on our little podcast here, our humble effort. And being that I see myself as more of a troubadour, trouvier, minnesinger, I'm just giving you riddles and legendary lore. I don't want to give you answers. I want you to try and take things with heart and try and find more depth. It's the challenge of becoming human. Being human isn't enough. You have to be becoming human. That means it's a work in progress. It's unfinished. And so, with that being said, how's your work coming there, David?
Well, as I wish you privately, but I'll now wish you on air, Happy New Year, John.
Yes.
And all our viewers, listeners, viewers, a little tireder than usual today because we've just had our groundbreaking Abrahamic service at our church, Valentine's Hall. We were privileged to have the young coordinator of the Muslim LGBT network, Ejel Khan, who kindly led the service with me. So Muslims and Christians worshipping together. But it took a bit of doing, and of course it's the wrong time of year for me because if it's not cold that's killing me, it's the damp that's killing me. So the running around on a Sunday like this has proved, I don't know, it's hit me slightly harder than I thought. Thank God I'm at my brother's house at the minute, or I'd probably be frozen to death somewhere. Watch this space. I think we're going to hold an ecumenical service later in the year, and what we're trying to do is I'm trying to get a rabbi from the local Orthodox synagogue to accompany us, and also a Sikh, because of course they're part of the Abrahamic stream. But it's do you know, as usual, it's everybody's bloody diaries that are getting in the way. I was told not too long ago by one of the young rabbis, and I'm sure it's true, we're looking at 2 years' time. Come off it. Donald Trump can smuggle something in less than 2 years. We're not asking for a huge exegesis or something. It's joining in for a couple of hours. But anyway, I'm sure that will be worked out. In terms of books and witchcraft, I had a strange spat on Facebook at the beginning of the week because you know how those old photographs sort of roll round again. There was a photograph of me looking suitably scared. I seem to remember it's where I was just about to drop the phone when I took the photograph, and holding up the Grammar of Witchcraft, and somebody warned me to keep clear of that stuff. And I said, have you read the title? And I was being warned away, and I said, I'm the author, and it's something to do with Shakespeare, and even that didn't work. So I'm sorry, I'm flesh and blood as well as a pastor. So I said, you're an idiot. But by that time, you've got the author of the book telling you what it's about. You're still being ignored. So yes, it's not about witchcraft. If you don't know the play The Tempest, the last play that Shakespeare wrote single-handed, please go and acquaint yourself. It's a major work of art. Caliban is the son of a witch. His mother is Sycorax, who was the owner of the magical island before Prospero, the Elizabethan mage, actually took possession of it. It's a wonderful defense of the free mind, the open intellect, and it's beautifully written. So you know, be aware that Shakespeare does mean something. You know, it's not, you're not just saying it as a series of excuses. It actually means something. Oh, you mentioned two of my heroes at the beginning of this. I love Hegel for all the wrong reasons, and I love Schopenhauer for all the right reasons. Hegel, I love as my favourite Lutheran. Oh, there's so much nonsense talked about Hegel nowadays. You know, I went to a meeting a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember what it was offhand. Some sort of weird, spurious academic meeting. Why don't these people ever read? You know, whatever happened to reading in academia? It's a good thing to do. Why not try and do it, modern academics? Where somebody said at the end of the most long and boring diatribe I've ever been forced to sink in one go, that, oh yeah, and they were all reading Hegel in the concentration camps. I thought, you're joking. You're absolutely joking. So it showed he knew nothing about Hegel, point one, nothing about the fact he's the ultimate professorial type, point two, and it showed he'd not read him, point three. Oh my God. You know, strike three and you're out. So I don't know. I never know where I stand with romantic rationalism. I never know where I stand with abstract or romantic rationalism. I know it's all clever stuff and it's all beautiful, and you know, I feel like floating around in a cloud of logic by the time I've got to the end of something. But is that what he meant, and is that what he intended? And I doubt it. You know, I always curiously veered towards Schopenhauer, which will get me in hot water, I'm sure. Who officially is an atheist. I think he's an atheist in the sense that Wittgenstein is an atheist. Because, you know, if ever there were learned works of faith, it's reading those two. And I don't know, you know, Hegel and Schopenhauer sort of balance each other for me. They're asking the questions they leave out in their own systems. Certainly, it would be unwise to say, I suspect, that Schopenhauer was influenced by Buddhism or Hinduism, because most of those texts hadn't been translated and were only trickling into the Europe of his period. I believe when he was an old man, he had rudimentary copies of the Upanishads by his bed. And you know what his great personal act of pride, and that's said in a very constructive sense, not in a negative sense, was that through an understanding of Kant, he had managed to achieve from the Western side what these slick Eastern boys had done through intuition and imagination. I mean, he basically says it. You know, so he felt that the whole mountain of knowledge, you know, from India, ageless India, all the way through this young upstart called Europe, had managed to find its own sense of spiritual gravity again. Excuse me. And the real mountain of genuine human knowledge had been restored in the West. That's a bit much, but I do admire his work. It's beautifully written. I noticed arty types like myself tend to swoon when they get to the second volume of The World Is But a Representation, because he says openly arts are superior to philosophy. There we go. Yeah, I agree. There we are. So you know, how can you not say that? And oh, yeah, very undervalued nowadays. I mean, and he went to school in Wimbledon, of course. Somebody I co-read a couple of years ago, so an undergraduate wanted me to read his essay, and I said, well, you do know he went to school in Wimbledon, and the guy put it in the essay and got it back from yet another learned academician. Oh, did he come to Britain? Yes, it's in the book. Why not read it? It's in the book. So yet again, they've not been reading anything. Oh, I mean, what got up Schopenhauer's nose and may have started, or at least been one of the starts of the entire process, is some young Church of England cleric. They can get up your nose, I admit it. You know, and his cheery attitude that everything was going to be okay in the end, that really got to Schopenhauer. Because how can that man possibly say that? Has he, you know, taken a look at human history? So yeah, I sort of tend to prefer him. I mean, you end up with this mystical non-being. I mean, it's, you know, this all-powerful will which indicates something. I mean, you know, there's something going on at the back of all of that, which strikes me very close to certain types of Hinduism. Not sure about the Buddhist side, but Hinduism, which ties in curiously with one of the things I was saying during our service of worship this afternoon. There's something going around at the moment, a division between the sort of Dharmic religions and the Abrahamic religions. I suspect that's a false dichotomy. I'm a great admirer of the Dharmic religions. I think they have covered so much territory, it's a little uncanny. But you know, that's again what I've said on the show before, that's a striving of the human spirit upwards. Whereas something like Abrahamism, which is shameless in its audacity, actually says, well, yes, we know that, but something reached down. You know, the call was answered, and it was answered in a multiplex way. I mean, you know, the sheer complexity of Abrahamic thought streams and their interactions with local religions, cultures, the different time periods of, say, you know, Jainism in the Middle Ages, Buddhism in the 1900s, the sheer way all of that's interacted with those islands of philosophy and theology, none of which have been done violence to. If you're looking at the real thinkers, the real meditators, the holies, and the real scholars, the real bohemians, you know, you end up with this sort of incredibly multi-layered stream that's still working itself out. So I don't really see a dichotomy. I see a mystery, a genuine mystery. And if I look at the Quran, you know, so right, they have a completely different view of the crucifixion. They have a different view of sin. They have a different view of what happens to prophets. But it struck me a couple of years ago. It's written in such a way where it's almost like somebody saying, it's up to you lot in the future to work all this out. These are different aspects of the same story. They're different aspects of the same truth. How does all this fit together? You know, you're looking at things through a kaleidoscope, but it's a single kaleidoscope. What does it mean? Now, I hope that's not simply my nascent Unitarianism. I confess, I give up. My nascent Unitarianism coming through. And yeah, the idea of one absolute divine reality is just so intoxicating, it's untrue. But I don't know. I just think we've got to stop arguing, and we've got to have a good sit down at some point and share scriptures at the different stages of historical development. I know a lot of my Muslim friends will absolutely detest that idea, but it's a point of fact that there are earlier editions of the Quran and there are latter editions of the Quran, which their own scholars actually, you know, if you're listening to them carefully, it's rather like Christendom, it's rather like Christianity, as I'm sure you know, John. Nobody's bloody listening to anybody else as usual. So, you know, you find earlier copies, you find latter copies. I think what we all need is a good old chinwag. We need to sit down and have a long discussion about what these scriptures mean, the times they were written in, and the implications. What does it all mean at the end of the day? Now, I'll hand back to you because I've probably said 1,000 provocative things that your message system is dealing with on red lights already, about to go into critical mass, and I need my hot water to stop coughing anyway. So I'll hand it back to you.
Well, you know, there's one of the most fundamental struggles that is apparent between East and West is the idea of the personal God. And that, of course, is present in Hinduism in the person of Krishna, right? And Krishna's, the Bhagavad Gita, the great dispensation of Krishna, the incarnation of Vishvakarman in the chariot, where at the Battle of Kurukshetra, where he's explaining to Arjuna about the great drama of human existence. And you see that as a presage of Christianity. Really, that's a prophetic development within Hinduism. The whole idea of Vishvakarman being the attribute of the sun in the Trinity of the East. And when you carry that forward, because you have the first, Rudolf Steiner describes in the cycle of the 25,920 years, which divides into 12 ages of 2,160 years that I frequently make reference to. But in the first post-Atlantean period, which was back in the age of Cancer, that's when the Manu and the seven rishis gave out the primordial doctrine that was much later codified, written down, and so you have the Upanishads and you have the Vedas, and you have that whole the fire cult of the Vedas developed out of that, which then after the age of Cancer, it evolved into Iran and Zarathustra and the great impulses that is later referred to as Zoroastrianism, but it's that primordial Zarathustrian stream that was so critical to understanding the mysteries that surround the three magi that visited the child Christ, whereas you could see the impulse of the East, the Indian impulse, is more of the angels and the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha in the Gospel of Luke, visiting the simple shepherds. And so after the age of Gemini, the age of Zarathustra, comes the age of Taurus, which is the Egypto-Babylonian Chaldean period. And I mean, that's so long ago, and it's hard for people to grasp a time relationship to it. And that's really what we've been deprived so much of, is our awareness as time beings. And the key, the shrine of our awareness as time beings is this rhythmic region of heart and lungs. And so the pulse beat is 72. That's the kind of the mean pulse beat, which would be 1 degree precession of the equinox. So it's like that. We're that whole cycle in miniature. And so on average, we would take 25,920 breaths in a day, which is, again, a mirroring of that precession cycle. Well, that's the canon number. Of course, the actual period astronomically itself goes through variations, and so it doesn't exactly line up, but it's archetypal cycle that's worked with in understanding the principles of Christianity, the esoteric Christian stream. It would be that 25,920 number that's so critical. And in getting into a deeper understanding of that can give you a basis to hold your images and work with in an imaginal way. You could study the ancient legends and the ancient texts and delve into these and have a frame of reference and try to connect them together, which is so much of what I do in my books. Mostly my first book is where I give you the chronology of the esoteric Christian stream as presented in the works of Rudolf Steiner. And it's really about the only work of its kind. Although there was Edward Rose Smith did some things similar, but he's more specifically scriptural, though I do recommend his works. But nonetheless, and there's also one work by Ehrenford Pfeiffer, who is really one of the major influences of myself. But in that regard, going back to this whole idea of the consciousness that indwells the human being, and the way in which it can manifest, because we're in our modern era, we're in the age of still in the age of Pisces, although people like to say this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, as it is in the song from Hair. And someday we'll have a show, we'll get into all that, because I had a lot of friends that were in Hair, And in fact, I've been at parties with Jerome Rogny, one of the guys who wrote it, and I had friends who were in Living Theater, its precursor, and had been in Fellini movies with Julian Beck, the founder of Living Theater. And so there's a lot of things we could discuss about all that. Leo knows a lot about that, by the way, Leo Zagami, because his grandmother was really instrumental in helping bring the works of uh, Living Theater and that whole movement, which is really a bohemian movement in theater that's really quite unusual. But I wasn't planning on going down that rabbit hole today, so I won't. But it is fascinating. We will get to it sometime because it plays a really a critical role because it's culture. And as our friend, good old Samuel Pepys, with his encoded diaries, as I frequently quote, culture is that which remains after you've forgotten what you set out to do. So there's a certain, you could see what he's even hinting at in there is that there's a certain will element involving culture, that it's, you're going and you're doing all these things, and whatever group you're in or whatever location you're in, it has an influence that's working into your work in the world, and the way in which you interpret architecture and art and all of that. And I would say I'm inclined to agree that art in a sense is higher than philosophy, in that philosophy could tend to degenerate into the realm of abstractions and reductionism, trying to reduce. Okay, well, now that we figured that out, I'm reminded of a. This is a funny story. A old friend of mine who used to be a professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto, and he uh, he was working on doing. I was active in the music business, and we were working on putting together a deck of collectible cards, like baseball cards, except for music. And I was working on putting a deck together for Albert King, who's one of the great lights of blues music. Speaking of the realm of feelings uh, in America, and while I was working on that, uh, my friend John was working on a project with David Lynch, the guy who made all the movies and all of that. And he was on the phone with David Lynch and David Lynch's attorney, and my friend John's the head of his art department. And David Lynch and the artist had this palette of swatches of all these different colors, and they're sitting there going over like what kind of green the border was going to be on the cards for David Lynch, and they're going back and forth. And so the attorney interrupts. He says, "Okay, so we've decided the border is going to be green." It was like he didn't get it, and I think that kind of typifies that concept of abstraction versus imagination and the artistic impulses. But I thought that was hilarious. Okay, so we decided the border's going to be green. You just couldn't bear going through 15 minutes of interpolation of all the various tones and shades of green and how they would complement certain scenes, and it was really driving him crazy. And so I guess that there is that kind of manic element that intrudes into the realm of the art, that Orpheus was, he was, he was the, in a sense, the mad poet. And you have that kind of ability to allow that tendency, the unknowable, to be able to be a part of whatever it is. And that's why, in all humility, in great works of art, they tend towards something they're not definitive. And it's only in the declining phase of something to where it becomes definitive. No, you can only say it this way. There isn't any other way to say it. Just as the way there were many of the Christian churchmen that would have take umbrage at that church in Norman, in the Norman church in Sicily, which has that large painting of the laughing Jesus. They would have probably taken umbrage at that. It didn't have enough fire and brimstone going on, and so you have that tendency that and it's funny because like our friend Roseanne Barr reminded me in the Zohar, it says that arrogance is always accompanied by ignorance, and so that you always want to try and see if you can be artful in your relationship to the world so that you don't get trapped in these crystallized forms of thinking or activity, right? So that you can move freely. And that has to do, I think, and Rudolf Steiner makes the point, is that you can discern the darkness or the light of a thought by the heart. That it's the heart that guides us as to the lightness or darkness of a thought.
I'm still not good at the mute button. You'll have to forgive me. I've got to work at that. Oh God, are we two anthropos? What a lovely thought. I used to be against talking heads. There were a couple of plays where I was involved, sort of as director. It's never happened in one of my productions. You know, where you just at a stage with people nodding their heads at each other, and learned conversation taking place. And I remember shouting at one of them, "My God, even I'm bored, and I've not paid for it." You know, so this isn't. If this is two learned anthropos, I'm very happy with that, because anthroposophy is full of life, and it's full of colour, and it's full of vigour. And my resettlement, my reintegration into it is very, very welcome indeed. And I can actually see sort of this anthropos talking turkey as something way above talking heads. I don't know why that reminded me when I was thinking that of cone heads, because have you noticed how literal everything is becoming nowadays? There's a TV channel called Gaia, which no doubt does amazing things, and oh God, I'd love to be interviewed on it. Gaia, if you ever see this, I'd love to be interviewed on it, talking about ancient sacred theatre. But apparently we needn't worry our heads about whether Atlantis was meant to be a symbolic story in Plato. It's symbolic, you know, because he's drawing on spiritual truth, for God's sake. You know, and apparently they all had cone heads, and it's transposed itself to being Antarctica. I can sort of see that, actually. And so what's my trouble with that if you take it entirely literally? Well, they ballsed it up as well, didn't they? Right, they might have had superior intellects, but they got it bloody wrong. So, you know, why should we look up to them? You know, the world's first artificial ecological disaster, and they did it. So why are we looking at what they came up with? Obviously, that's not worth pursuing. So time. I remembered another story as you were speaking, which was I was chatting years ago with some Indian friends of mine. I mean, my love, as everybody knows, I think has tended to be more Central Asia than India. I've always loved India, you know, the mother of all civilizations, yada, 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 yada. But for me, there was always an extra magic in Central Asia. That said, I was told an incredible teaching story years ago about the difference between their trinity, Hindu Shiva and Vishnu, whereas the aspirant went to the Lord Shiva and kicked him, I believe it was in the side, and it took 100,000 cold baths and an army of priests to calm him down before he actually saw enough sense to see it was just a mortal human being. There's no need to get umbrage. You know? So it took all of that to calm him down. The aspirant went to kick the middle one, Brahma, and got this long, boring lecture on right and wrong. Look, it's perfectly unacceptable for you to go out kicking people. So that's the law kicking in. You've got the passion, you've got the law. And he went up to Vishnu, and Vishnu asked if he'd hurt his foot. And I thought I'd find that ridiculous, but actually I didn't. Oh my God, I'm on home territory. That's such a Christian reaction. I really love that. So yeah, I'm into all this spacey Vaishnava material. I mean, spacey green Krishnas. I think it's wonderful, because you're on home territory. Like what was it, that Japanese incarnation of Buddha, the Amitabha. There's a temple I've got to go to in Japan, where the Amitabha reaches out with 100,000 arms to drag everyone into salvation, and his realm is nothing but light and peace and truth. Well, my God, I'm at home already. How can that not be the Christian impulse in another version? Of course it is. If we think religions are just ideologies and theology always did it for me more than philosophy, curiously, because theology's got the imagination still in it, not fantasy, but the imagination. Whereas in philosophy nowadays, the so-called Anglo-American school and the so-called continental school, most types of imagination, let alone creativity, are being strangled out of it. So theology seems to be the last bastion of human thinking. Time. There's something weird in time. I enjoyed reading Heidegger. I enjoyed Sein und Zeit. And we do, John, we need a big talk about theatre and theatre experiences one day. I think that's wonderful. And I'd forgotten Leo's got those esoteric connections with theatre. I'd completely forgotten that. But, I remember reading Being and Time. Lots of people, it's become an ersatz religion for lots of people. For God's sake, and it's a thinker. It's a thinker who tries to live as a Swabian peasant. It's a thinker. So he made no claims to anything else. My disappointment with the book is that he spends the entire book skirting around theology. Bloody come out and say it, man. Do you want to talk about theology or not? And I'm not the only person that ended up with that sort of opinion, and I'm an admirer. I'm not a detractor. I can see why he did that. I can see why that's valuable. I can see why the modern age some people think, can only skirt around theological issues. Though at the end of the day, I'm not sure that's true, because there's such a thing as religious experience. There's inherited tradition. There are mores. There are morals. There are systems and arts from the past we can discuss. So that's not entirely the case. But no, I think, ironically, what the modern secular West has forgotten, and art is managing to restore, albeit very slowly, is a sense of time, not as the ultimate limitation of a human being, but as the greatest gift of a human being. It's the angel of time that sooner or later will announce the apocalypse. It's not all these good-looking guys blowing trumpets, as magnificent as that is, looking cool and walking around celestial domains. We're bringing an end to that world. Wonderfully cool. But I notice it's the silent and reserved and rather serene angel of time, if we're reading all that carefully, that actually says, well, no, this has gone as far as it's going to go. And now we're looking at rebirth. We're looking at judgment. We're looking at apocalypse. We're looking at, because of course, like Judy Garland, the apocalypse isn't something to fear. Be happy. Get ready for the judgment day. It's a new beginning for a stroke towards a new heaven and a new earth. Now, no doubt that will make lots of people very nervous, but maybe it shouldn't make everybody nervous, particularly anthroposophists. I've been thinking a lot since last week about whether Rudolf Steiner was writing Gnosticism or not, and I'm still not sure. But I think if he was, that's absolutely wonderful, because that's the step above time, of course. I'll hand that back to you, because I've probably said far too much, but you've got to answer the Coneheads thing, because that's really irritating me. So the master race that lived on Atlantis, all of whom ended up in Latin America, wasting their time after dropping the ball on their own continent. I'll hand it back.
Well, gee, that's a hard act to follow. But then you are a theater guy. Yeah, I think that when you suspend your disbelief. I think that is the critical thing when trying to come to terms with the work of Rudolf Steiner. It's like, and that's why they're really you're not going to find critical books about Rudolf Steiner. Uh, they're few and far between because people that are using abstract thinking and trying to read the work of Rudolf Steiner, they have a hard time getting to the end of a paragraph. They can't hold the thought. You have to enter into it. You have to participate. It becomes an act of will, really, to be able to enter into his thinking about things, because he'll give you pieces, and it's something that occurs over a lifetime. It's really a vast reservoir of riddles. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting quietly, and then all of a sudden I'm contemplating something he said, and then I remember something that I had read of his, maybe even 30 years ago, and all of a sudden I plug them together, and I have this aha moment, because there was something in me, for whatever reason, was capable of connecting the dots. And that's the way it is when you have somebody who has the largest body of work of anybody in the 20th century, really. What, in excess of 6,000 lectures, 50 published books and articles. And of course, then you can get into his everything else, the works of art and sculpture, architecture. It just really, it's hard to find a person who has gone the full gamut, and it's that's an interesting thing in and of itself, is that once you enter into it, if you have any degree of sincerity, you have to say, okay, well, is he just making this stuff up, or is he really, as you could see when you study his works, it's a work in progress as he's doing it. And there are points in lectures where he goes, oh, now I see. And because he's talking about something, and he's solved a riddle of his own at that very moment. And so when you look into his work, you find that there's an entirely consistent uh, thread running through the whole thing. That there's this internal consistency is the real earmark of something that's not made up. It's just like when you go and you're being questioned, and if you're telling a lie, they'll keep asking you over and over, tell me a different way, and you keep, and if there's no internal consistency, well, you're just making it up. But to have 6,000 lectures with internal consistency is beyond the confabulation abilities of any human being that I know of. And when especially when it's layers and layers and layers and layers of consistency. And so I challenge anybody to try and take up that quest of trying to find a lack of internal consistency, because usually the inconsistency, it's in the reader, that they don't understand what he's saying, and they haven't done enough work with it to be able to create a hut, or their own place in which they can dwell within the realm of thought, so that you can have a relationship to the ideas that are being expressed in the imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And ultimately, in looking at it that way, it just creates a tremendous humility on my part. And the other thing is one's individual karma in relation to the work. I can't tell you how many times I've gone and picked up a recently translated work of Rudolf Steiner's. This is years ago, for the most part, but it still happens. I'll be reading something, and I'll be visited by an idea, And then I turn the page, and he starts talking about the idea that had visited upon me. And so, what is that? I mean, there's a certain synchronicity there that defies description, especially when you consider the depth of the subject matter that's being involved, that it wouldn't be something that I would have just extracted from a chance encounter and on the previous day's events or what have you, but that there's some rectitude going on there that's very, very significant. But anybody approaching this body of work, I'd recommend the 5 basic books, which is Knowledge of Higher Worlds, How Is It Achieved, and Occult Science and Outline, or Esoteric Science and Outline, as it's variously titled, Theosophy, and his Philosophy of Freedom, or Philosophy of Spiritual Activity is the other title for that. But because once you've taken up those things, and if you could suspend your disbelief and just entertain those thoughts, you'll find that something comes about, a quickening that happens that's tremendously wholesome and heartwarming, really, because to me, the profoundest revelation is to come to a deeper understanding of the Bible and the actual destiny and mission of Jesus Christ and what that entails. And again, like I frequently say, Rudolf Steiner points towards the profundity of the Bible, and that it can be meaningful for the simplest individual, but yet some of the most penetrating, sophisticated intellects have struggled with its content, so that there's just whatever level you're at, it can meet you. Of course, if you just want to take it with abstract thought and of materialism, that you'd want to dismiss it as just a bunch of fables, and ultimately everything's not for everybody at the same time. See, and so later with them, just like I'm sure the people of that tendency, I'm sure they left this podcast quite a while ago because they think, well, this guy's nuts. Well, I consider that a compliment.
I never know how to respond to things like that. Eddie Izzard, let me start with him. Eddie Izzard, you keep asking about my preferred pronouns. As a proud LGBTQIA+, excuse me, don't ask me what it all stands for, and I'm sure there are more letters by now since they managed to increase every single month. We're all talking about preferred pronouns nowadays. Well, as a boy, as someone who was born a boy, I prefer he, him, and his. Call me old-fashioned, but they're the pronouns I think that fit a boy. Eddie Izzard, who is a British comedian, a cross-dressing British comedian. Hey, I've got no hang-ups. If you've got hang-ups, not you, John, our listeners. Yeah, good luck to you. Life is too short. I don't think you should really build a career out of being a cross-dresser. He's funny sometimes, truly. He has now decided his preferred pronouns are she and her. So all I can assume is that's a poor publicity week, because if you're in showbiz, it's a cutthroat affair. You've got to come up with something to keep people interested. Why is that coming up? Because, oh gosh, people that lose interest too quickly. I think if there was a problem in the modern age, it's attracting attention long enough for anything real to be thought about or discussed. I'm intensely worried by this MTV, let's reduce the attention span to 50 nanoseconds attitude because our sponsors want yet another word. No, we've got to try to fight that back. So Eddie Izzard has his way of dealing with it. I think this show bucks the system in every single way. We'd like people to hang around, and if you don't want to hang around, great, but goodbye. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out if you don't. If you don't, good luck to you. We talk about lots of abstract things. I'm talking about loads of abstract things today. All the way through this conversation, curiously, Mondrian has been coming up to my mind. I absolutely hated his work. when I first saw it in one of the big galleries in London. Oh my God, interior design. Until I read the program more carefully, and the person I was with said, "Look, it's all Platonism." I'm like, oh! So I suddenly realised that I'm looking at artistic genius as opposed to somebody cashing in with tables and chairs. Because of course the lines are perfect, the colours are perfect, so it links in with the David Lynch thing. You have to be a great artist to appreciate the nuances, the subtleties, the inferences, the suggestions. And it's only when art starts getting to a superior level. I'm a great admirer of David Lynch. And it reaches the level of a Mondrian when you think, oh my God, what does that blue mean when it's next to that other blue? Oh my God, I'm having a crisis. It's something to do with Platonic archetypes. So you suddenly realize you're in a completely different thought world, or at least you're in a thought world that wishes to express Platonism in a completely different way. Now that's the beginning of unusual journeying, I suspect, of the type that Steiner was doing and this show is trying to encourage. I never got to the end of Steiner. I mean, I was one of those people, I think, that was frustrated by him in the past. Not in the sense I'd have to put the book down. I mean, there have been experiences when I needed to put a book down. When I first read the Agathos, the holy book of the Zoroastrians, and I was thinking of the time frame that links in with earlier it was written in, and all of a sudden there's the poetry of a modern mind talking about good and evil. Oh my heavens, that's mind blowing. I had to put that down and go back to it a couple of months later because it was so unnerving. And if anybody wants to see an unacknowledged prophet, I suggest you look at the story, the life and the history of Zoroaster, and what he's saying and why he's saying it, because that really needs to be contemplated at great depth and length. After all, a great deal of Hebrew theology and mysticism originates from Zoroastrianism. There isn't really an informed rabbi anyway that would deny what I've just said. And therefore, de facto, it influences Christianity. And of course, which we said before, the Magi, the three wise men, are actually Zoroastrian priests. They're from the very beginning. Zoroastrianism is raising its flag in the Christian mysteries and saying, look, there are depths here, there are deep and bright parts to all this which you can't really get at with a quick reading, a superficial reading. I mean, an indirect friend of mine is Penn Jillette, a Penn and Teller. What a magician that man is. I mean, heaven's sake, I can't work out how he's doing half of it. He, of course, is an atheist, and he's a libertarian. I noticed that one of the few areas I feel he lets himself down is when it comes to religion, because he's got the attitude, I think, and if I'm misrepresenting, please forgive me, Penn, that it's old stories that people found, certain types of moral comfort from, and that's the end of the tale. And he prides himself, or at least he did at one point, on reading the scripture daily, which of course scripture says you should do. But I can't help feeling that if you've got this sort of one-dimensional attitude to the fact it's all old folk tales and it's marmalized history and it's not really this and it's not really that, we can all do so much better now. If the whole concept of sacred writing is thrown out the window, along with the fact that actually whole schools of theologists and philosophers were actually dedicated to compiling these things around the sayings of a mystic, the sayings, some say, of the Savior himself. All of a sudden you're not dealing with one-dimensional material, you're dealing with other things. And if that would take a lifetime, if the rabbis are right, and sometimes a single line in the Bible takes a lifetime to discover, and I've no doubt of that, we've got to let Steiner off the hook a bit and think, right, that is a genuine mystic, that's a genuine scholar, and yes, he needs to be struggled with, as opposed to just put down because someone's getting bored. Sod off if you're getting bored. Sod off if you're getting bored. I don't think we should What are people thirsty and hungry for nowadays? They're thirsty and hungry for hard knowledge. This isn't an age of faith, and that's not said to throw away faith. This is an age of knowledge. And that is a remarkable thing to think about. It's a remarkable fact to take on board. We have faith that the existential isn't just depressing, it isn't just nature red in tooth and claw, it's not just you live and you die. We have faith that love and wisdom and beauty and truth and goodness are meaningful in the human condition. And if that faith then leads us to the next step, whereby spiritual knowledge actually becomes a possibility, Steiner is revealed as one of the greatest treasures. His writings are revealed as some of the most significant texts in the whole of the Western civilizational enterprise. Therefore, I don't know. I find myself. This show is bucking the entire system. We're not interested in simply attracting the Eddie Izzards. Apparently, he's run 13 marathons for the deprived. When was that? I keep my eye on the stage. I keep my eye on theatrical gossip. When was that? Anyway, so, we're not interested in just tantalizing. We're interested in talking to people and not treating them like idiots and knowing they might find, oh, that's an interesting thing. John said something mystical and interesting. Let's see where that leads. And I think that's the genuine magic of this show. I'll hand you back, John.
Well, yeah. And I like to think we're possessed of an uncompromising humility. And that being said, I might humbly entreat some of you out there, perhaps, to venture forth and what is that? Oh, yeah, very good. I might entreat some of you to venture forth and check out our books. And if you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, you can make donations at PayPal. For me, that's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And for Reverend David, that's paypal.me/DPARRY777. DParry777. You can buy us a cup of coffee or some kind of contributions greatly helps to offset the expense of finding the reference materials, especially the ones that I thought I had, and I go looking for them, and I realized that they had gone by the wayside when I had to trim the herd. And so I've been reaccumulating books that I've had in the past. I've had so many libraries. It's kind of peculiar. These things that those of you that are unfamiliar, they're called books. And I know that it kind of challenges somebody who's accustomed to doing most of their reading on social media, but it's a good idea to venture forward and get into some printed writing so that you don't lose the ability. They're finding now that it's people have difficulty in reading the printed word when exposed to too much social media, that it's somehow you process it differently than you do when it's a digital medium. And so that's a real challenge there. You really have to have self-reference in relation to so much sensory input as what you would get from social media. That being said, at this point in our little conversation, we like to have Reverend David kind of consecrate our conversation. And today, I think it's that I hope that we could find peaceful resolution to the challenges that are facing mankind at this critical stage. And if you would, David, after you give your next litany, if you could share a prayer to consecrate this moment for us into the new year.
Thank you. I had to show you that book because I forgot to earlier. Apparently, I'm turning into August Strindberg. I hope that's true. Or do I hope that's true? I mean, he went mad, didn't he? I mean, there's a wonderful cartoon thing on YouTube, Strindberg and his little friend Helium, if you get the chance to ever see it. You know, there's Strindberg, my favorite one is Strindberg lying on the beach and he's depressed. What a surprise. And he says, the fox ate the ducks and, he's lost all his money. And you get this little cloud of helium going, wee, to try and cheer him up. So anyone that knows about Strindberg and the fact they used to diagnose helium in those days will appreciate the game. A great genius. I mean, the thing I love about this book, don't be put off by the title, it's arty stuff, by God, that guy is paranoid when he's writing that. But the point is where he says one week he's being entertained by a theatre manager calling him great master, and the next week he's being chased down the road for money owed by the very same man. So something we can all do business with anyway. My dear friends, we're approaching a new year. We're still in lockdowns of various degrees and intensities across the planet. Some people see that as incredibly challenging on a number of levels, and I don't mean the rights and wrongs of lockdown. I mean those that are beginning to suffer from mental health issues, those that are suffering from fear. I mean, the elderly in this area are genuinely suffering from the types of anxieties that can't really be addressed too easily. It's in many ways a dark time. This is still the dark time of the year. The nights are very long. But we've already passed the solstice when the nights start to get shorter and light has been reborn and beginning to take back its rightful territory. My dear friends, never forget, no matter how dark external and internal circumstances get for any of us, the light is there and we are the light. And the light is our home, our future, our evolution, and our blessed paradise through Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. And thank everybody. You're getting really good at that, by the way. Maybe it's because you just did a service today over at your new abode, over at the wonderful. You're always working on something, and I that's one of the things that attracted me to get this whole program going with you, is that you are genuinely a work in progress. And that being said, I have a feeling that's the case with our listeners, or they wouldn't put up with our meandering diatribes. But in that being said, in all reference to the freedom of human will, I hope that human culture can move forward in liberty, and that they can find a path in peace, that they might further enlighten themselves as to what might be their individual path in life. So that being said, thank you all so much, and we'll see you again next week.